Welcome back to Asianomics. I'm your host, Alex. The US dollar is a robust currency that fuels America's military might and sanctions against enemies worldwide. Nevertheless, two esteemed economic analysts predict a potential shakeup thanks to Chinese President Xi Jinping's recent visit to Saudi Arabia. During his trip, Xi put forth a daring plan that could jeopardize the US dollar's dominance as the global reserve currency. This video will uncover China's strategy to dethrone the US dollar and ponder whether fears of the currency's demise are overstated. China aims to reduce the US dollar's supremacy, and it all stems from the unfair benefits America gains in their rivalry. Being the world's reserve currency allows the US to spend much more than it earns overseas, which is called the exorbitant privilege, a term coined by French economists in the 1960s. This advantage gives the US an edge that China finds unfair. The exorbitant privilege enjoyed by the US means that it doesn't need to fret about a currency crisis, unlike countries like Lebanon and Sri Lanka that faced this predicament. In these instances, the nations had insufficient dollars to procure vital imports. However, as the US prints its currency, it can never run out of dollars. The US dollar's high demand worldwide allows the US to spend more on military aid and bases than China can. But that's not all. The dollar also lets the US hurt its enemies by banning them from the international financial system based on the dollar. This means that they cannot buy important imports or get loans. To do this, the US simply forbids any US bank from doing business with its enemies. Even big Chinese banks were forced to stop working with Russian banks because they rely on US banks to conduct transactions in dollars. But China has been working to change this by making deals with other countries to use their own currencies instead of dollars. However, this process takes time, and not all countries are willing to switch to new currencies. Additionally, many countries still see the dollar as a stable and reliable currency, so they may be hesitant to switch. While China's government is really powerful, forcing foreign companies and countries to accept Renminbi payments is not that easy. China will have to convince them instead by using the power of economic incentives for its bold new plan to end dollar dominance. The plan is to encourage the use of multiple currencies and make the Renminbi more appealing to the world. But how? To convince traders and countries outside China to use Renminbi, China needs to make it more appealing by improving its accessibility and attractiveness. The plan includes three main ways to achieve this goal. First, China will make it simpler to use Renminbi internationally. Second, it aims to make saving in Renminbi more attractive by providing more profitable investment opportunities. And third, China will increase the currency's liquidity to make it easier for foreigners to obtain Renminbi. Let's say you are a seller in Japan who exports goods to Europe. Would you prefer to be paid in US dollars or Renminbi instead of yen? This is where spendability comes in. On a scale of 1 to 10, the US dollar would probably score a 9 or 10 since it is widely accepted globally. The current Renminbi, however, would probably only score a 3 or 4 since it is not yet widely used outside of China. But China's plan to make the Renminbi a viable alternative to the dollar could potentially increase its score to a 6 or 7 in the future. The US dollar is used for about 88% of transactions in foreign exchange markets. This is because exporters outside the US prefer to invoice between 70% to 80% of their transactions in US dollars. This also means that exchanging US dollars is the cheapest compared to other currencies. Euro is the only exception since some European exporters prefer to use it. However, China has a plan to make their currency, the Renminbi, more widely accepted. Currently, China has been making progress by convincing major energy exporters like Russia and Venezuela to accept payments in Renminbi. If more countries follow suit, it would make the Renminbi a much more spendable currency. President Xi's plan to deepen digital currency cooperation and advance the multiple central bank digital currency bridge project will make the Renminbi easier to spend internationally. The project will reroute global payments from big sanctionable private banks to a group of 4 central banks, which would rapidly expand if China succeeds. This would help make the Renminbi more spendable on the global stage and could also help China dodge US sanctions in the future. China's plan to reroute global payments through a group of central banks could increase the use of renminbi in international transactions. This is called a network effect and could make renminbi even more popular. Some financial analysts believe that China's plan could make renminbi as desirable as other major currencies, but others argue that there are other factors to consider, such as investment opportunities. When someone receives a currency from another country, like when an exporter receives renminbi, they may not want to spend or convert all of it right away. But when people outside of China or the US decide where to save their money, they consider how attractive a currency is. For example, it can be hard for someone like me to save in renminbi because banks and brokers don't let me access China's financial markets. However, it's easy for me to invest in the US financial markets if I want to save in US dollars. For people like me, it's easier to save and invest in US dollars than in renminbi because there are more opportunities available. However, big exporters can now open renminbi accounts with big banks in London and New York. And since 2009, China has opened up its markets to big investors. This has attracted a lot of money into China. But China still limits access to its financial markets for foreigners, which is difficult for big global companies and even harder for gigantic exporters like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia earns a lot of foreign currency by exporting oil, but it can't spend it all. Since it's a big country, if it moves money into or out of the small portion of China's markets available to them, it can affect the market's performance. This means that if Saudi Arabia invests in Chinese markets, they will go up and they will make money. But if they move money out of China quickly, they will lose money because the market's price will go down. This is why big exporters like Saudi Arabia and China find the US dollar attractive. The US markets are very large and can handle large amounts of money without affecting their prices. However, recently, the US froze the assets of some Russian investors and its central bank, which made the US market less attractive to Saudi Arabia and China. After the US froze the assets of some Russian investors and its central bank, many countries started to question if their money was safe in the United States. While foreign investors in China are currently well protected, they worry that China could suddenly change the rules or impose its own sanctions. When it comes to investorability, the US dollar is still a good choice because its markets are easily accessible, can handle a lot of money, and are relatively safe. On a scale of 1 to 10, the US dollar would get a score of 7. China's markets have grown a lot, but they are not as deep as the US markets, and there are still many financial restrictions. If not for these restrictions, the score for China's currency, the renminbi, would be a 6, but with the restrictions, it only gets a score of 3. Xi, the leader of China, recently expressed his interest in making it easier for countries in the Gulf Cooperation Council to invest in China's financial markets. This could potentially make China's financial markets more visible to these countries and increase their attractiveness from a score of 3 to a score of 5. While this is a step in the right direction, it's not yet a significant threat to the US dollar. However, it's not easy for China to open up its financial markets completely due to recent restrictions on large money flows leaving the country. Now let's look at the final category of currency attractiveness, which is liquidity. This category is a bit complicated, but it basically means that a country should be able to easily get foreign currency without making its price go up too much. There are two main strategies countries use to do this. One is called the development strategy, which countries like South Korea, Japan, and China follow. They promote exports, but limit imports, so they can collect a lot of dollars, which they then save in the US markets. On the other hand, some countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Turkey borrow dollars to pay for their imports instead of making their own export sector competitive. This becomes a problem when the value of the dollar goes up and they can no longer afford to buy essential goods like fuel and food. Although they could print their own currency to buy dollars on the markets, this would decrease the value of their currency, leading to inflation and making life harder for the population. This is why the export-oriented strategy followed by Asian countries was so popular. However, some economists fail to consider that for these countries to export more than they import and accumulate dollars, other countries must import more than they export. Over the years, the United States has allowed other countries to export more than they import, making the dollar more attractive as an international currency. This is because these countries need dollars to pay for their imports. The US also has deep financial markets, which make it easy for the country to get dollar loans. This has made the dollar very liquid or easily exchangeable. On the other hand, China is a net exporter, so it's harder to obtain its currency, the renminbi. To increase the renminbi's liquidity, China is increasing its network of currency swap lines with other central banks. However, the best way for China to challenge the dollar's liquidity is to increase the use of the renminbi in international trade by opening up its consumer market and encouraging exports from its poorer neighbors. But what do you think? Let me know. This is Alex from Asianomics signing off.